Hello and welcome to the Monday show via the Everything is Black and White podcast. I'm Andrew Musgrove, joined by Aaron Stokes, as we look back on a great win for Newcastle United over Ipswich Town. The Magpies ran out 3-0 winners thanks to goals from Alexander Isak, Dan Burn and Will Osula, a victory that puts them up to third in the Premier League table. We'll discuss all the key talking points as United take a huge step towards Champions League qualification. This episode, as always, is sponsored by NordVPN, and it's a perfect app to take with you when you head away on your summer holidays. It'll keep your device safe as you connect it to public Wi-Fi, as well as potentially helping you save money on flights and hotels as you can switch your location to your destination. For an exclusive discount on your plan, click the link in the podcast description box. Aaron, welcome. How are we doing? Are you well?
Yeah, very good. A very good weekend, and that is because Newcastle United back to winning ways with minimal fuss, just the way we like it. Not even a little scare. So yeah, what more could you want?
Just nicely beating Ipswich routinely.
A very good goal by a certain Will Osula. And I know that you are a little bit miffed, aren't you, that you missed that big occasion on Saturday.
To be clear, I'm miffed that I missed it. I'm not miffed that he scored it, but it was literally like the last thing on my bucket list for this season was to see Will Osula score a Premier League goal, because I've been willing him on. At times it's felt like I'm the only one to have any confidence in the lad. I know you've not been quite as certain as I am that he's going to make it, but I mean, what a header.
Yeah, absolutely fantastic goal, wasn't it? One that Alan Shearer would have been very, very proud of. There's a great sort of replay where Callum Wilson pulls an Ipswich defender at the ground, and you think, I could get chalked off that. And I think Callum Wilson celebrated a little bit sheepishly. But yeah, look, fantastic goal, fantastic scenes afterwards. And yeah, there's just one man missing from the stands to see it.
It's just my luck, Just my luck. I had avoided the scoreline until match of the day. You might have seen the video that I put out late on Saturday night. And then when I saw Osula had scored, I just could not believe it. It's been 2 weeks of illness in my house, so I'm keeping everything crossed that we get through this week. And I was so looking forward to the Ipswich game because you felt it was going to be a nailed-on win. I thought we'd come through the end of the sickness. And then on Friday night, my wife got ill and I had to miss the game. Unbelievable. So hopefully I don't miss the Chelsea game, which is the next one. Before that, there is Brighton. But before that, we've got to talk about beating Ipswich, because as much as I hate not being there, it was wonderful to see them win. And that's what matters. Before we talk about the win over Ipswich, I just want to give a massive shout out to you and the team for Saturday's superb front page, where you've gone out and got the opinion of some celebrities and local figures to get their view on St James's Park. Should they stay? Should they go? A lot of hard work, Aaron, but it's fair to say that the opinion, the viewpoint on that question, should Newcastle stay at St James's Park or should they go, is split, and it was shown in the Vox Pops that you've done with all these big names.
Yeah, we wanted to do sort of a campaign here at the Chronicle about the stadium, and we thought it would be a good idea to maybe go out and get some famous faces and from the world of celebrity, some sort of people in and around Newcastle United, club legends, former managers. There it is on the screen there. The likes of Rafa Benitez, Les Ferdinand, Kim McGuinness, the mayor, Lisa Nandy, the culture secretary, Shea Given, and even Robbie Williams, who's not even from the area, but we thought we had the chance to interview him, so why not ask him? I'll tell you what, he actually gave a good answer, to be fair. Something along the lines of, if you don't move with the times, you get left behind. It sounds like a lyric, doesn't it?
It certainly does. And I'm now going to spend the next hour using Robbie Williams' songs in my questions. Newcastle United beat Ipswich on Saturday, and thankfully the fear that they'd come undone didn't ring true. They proved to be strong. Hey? Yeah, that good, that right? He is coming to Tyneside, isn't he?
Yeah,
in a couple of months' time, right? Yeah, you got your tickets?
No, not yet, but I think I will, because I'm anybody who works in the Chronicle office knows I'm a big Robbie fan.
I think there might be a scrap for press tickets here.
Yeah.
Because there's quite a few Robbie fans in the office.
And anybody who's ever been in Cozy Joe's with me on a Saturday night knows my love for Robbie. So
indeed, he's not a shy man when it comes to karaoke, is Aaron. But I've made my viewpoint clear on St James's Park. I put it in the print there as part of this special edition. For me, it's time to move, as hard as it will be. It's time to say goodbye to St James's Park. Let's get to a brand new state-of-the-art stadium capable of coping with the demand, but also having the facilities to offer more than just football, to make sure every revenue stream is tapped into. I know you're a man who likes to sit on the fence. Are you sitting on the fence on this one? Stay or go?
Yeah, a little bit, because I've certainly warmed to the idea of going more so than I had about a year ago. But if anybody was obviously there or was listening to the live event we did, I got asked the question, and I think I said then, I'll say now, my big fear is that you lose the atmosphere that St James's Park has. So it would depend a lot on what the stadium actually looks like physically, how far away from the pitch you are, and stuff like that. And I just think, if it's not broke, don't fix it. But I understand the reasons for potentially going, the revenue. And look, I would have no doubt that they would build an absolute best-in-class location if they were to go. So I can see both sides.
I've got to say, I don't think there's any concern about the atmosphere. It's about the people that fill the seats.
Yeah, well, tell that to West Ham, who had a fantastic atmosphere at Upton Park. I bet
Yeah,
they were saying the same.
But that's down to the stadium being so far back.
Yeah, but that's exactly what I'm saying.
Newcastle aren't going to make that same mistake if they do move to a brand new stadium. So let us know in the comments your thoughts. Should Newcastle stay or should they go? And you can go onto our website and catch up with all the Vox Pops there. As Aaron said, some big names sharing their viewpoint, but your opinion matters just as much as those. Right, we are now going to talk about the win. Newcastle got the win. Missed the game, but I've caught up on it. Watched the highlights, listened to various podcasts, read up on it as well. It just seems, as we said at the start, I missed a routine win on what was just a happy and sunny afternoon up at St James's Park.
Yeah, look, Newcastle United were really helped by the sending off to Ben Johnson in the first half. I must admit, the first 20-25 minutes of the game weren't pretty. Newcastle United resorted essentially just sticking balls in the penalty area, and every single one of them was cleared pretty comfortably by Ipswich, who were then trying to catch Newcastle on the counter-attack. We saw flashes of Liam Delap, tearing past Dan Burn and showing his pace. And then, as I say, sort of late in the first half, the game gets flipped on its head because, Ipswich are down to 10, rightly so. And Newcastle, from that point, sort of just went into cruise control mode. But I think you do have to give credit to Newcastle. They worn them down. They didn't take the foot off the gas. Eddie Howe wanted more goals as the game went on. He wasn't just reluctant and, going 2-0 up and then just sort of parking the bus or anything. So it was a routine win, but it would have been really interesting to see how the game would have gone if it had been 11v11, because Newcastle definitely didn't have it all their own way in the first half. And they did look like they were struggling to break Ipswich down at times.
Ipswich playing with that low block. So it does sound like Newcastle United were struggling. Do you think that the game did depend on that dismissal?
I don't know if it depended on it, but look, Newcastle United from that moment on were never really going to lose the game. Ipswich resorted to essentially just sticking 10 men behind the ball, and they didn't really have any chances of their own after the sending off. So I don't think it depended on it, but it certainly aided Newcastle greatly. And look, we'll never know how it would have turned out if it was 11v11, but Newcastle were really, really struggling to break Ipswich down before then.
Of course, Ipswich have got a very good record on the road, or good in context of their entire season. It's much better anyway than the one they have at home. But let's start with Eddie Howe's return to the dugout. He admitted afterwards, Aaron, that he was lacking energy, so it was clearly a difficult day for him. But a win on his return, 3 goals and a clean sheet. It's not a bad return, is it?
Yeah, very, very good return. And I think he'll probably be quite happy that the game was done and dusted by the hour mark, because it meant that he could essentially just take a seat on the dugout and not worry too much. Very, very good to see him back. It was very, very good to speak to him on Friday. Obviously, anybody who listened to the pod on Friday afternoon will have got a glimpse of what he was like. But just being there, it was good to see him back in the room. He was looking a lot healthier, I must admit, than I thought he probably would have, given how quick he's returned. But yeah, first half against Ipswich, he was on the touchline as if he'd never been away. He was maybe letting Tyndall do some of the shouting, but he was definitely there as a presence. And then I think it was noticeable in the second half that Tyndall was the one at the front line. Howe was sat back. He didn't really come out the dugout much, and he even said to us at the end of the game that he was sort of,
struggling to shout was one of the things he said,
and ready for his bed.
Do you think that this is Howe until he fully recovers, or do you think this is potentially a change in actually how Eddie Howe works from this moment forward?
No, I think this is a change until he gets better. I don't think we're going to see this huge wholesale change of Eddie Howe, and that he's suddenly going to start coming into training at 8 instead of 6 or anything like that. I don't think it's going to be a long-term change. But I certainly get the sense, and I think this is because of how quickly he's returned. And our colleague Kieran Kelly sort of asked how the question outright on Saturday evening and said, look, did you feel like you had to come back? Because nobody really would have begrudged you taking another couple of games, taking until the end of the season. But I think Howe knows that he's back, but he's not back at 100%. He came out on Friday and said, look, I'm not 100% physically, but I feel like mentally I'm close to, where I should be. He said he's not going to be running around the training ground as much, which you can understand. So I think we'll see Howe involved with everything as he usually is, but I think we'll see a lot less energy being exerted on the touchline, on the training ground. I think Tyndall will sort of keep that side of it up until the end of the season.
I mean, I was totally shocked when the news broke last week that he was back, because some of the noises I were hearing that, he might not return until the start of next season, because of course this is not an illness which you can just laugh off. And as Eddie Howe said there, he's not 100% in his body, and he was getting tired towards the end of the afternoon as well. So for him to be back in the dugout after such a short turnaround, I was massively surprised.
Yeah, you've got to think he was diagnosed with pneumonia, taken to hospital on the weekend around the 12th of April, and he was back on the training pitch on the 23rd, 24th. I want to say that's what, 11 days, 12 days. It's a hugely quick turnaround, and as Kieran said, our colleague, nobody would have begrudged him an extra couple of weeks, or even as I say, until the summer. But yeah, look, he's back. He clearly feels he can be back.
Interesting that he mentioned Jason Tyndall doing the shouting and let him kind of prowl the touchline. Tyndall is now banned for the game against Brighton. So does that kind of throw a spanner in the works in terms of how Howe is looking to approach his final games until he gets back to being 100%, do you think?
No, I mean, we did obviously bring that up on Saturday when we knew about Tyndall's ban. He got booked on the touchline. We don't really know what for, if I'm totally honest. I don't think Eddie Howe really knew. He was a bit baffled by it. But Eddie Howe really refuted any talk that it was going to have a big difference. He said, don't over-egg it. He said quite funnily, he said, the players can't hear you shouting anyway. We think they can, but really they probably can't, especially not at St James's Park when the atmosphere is as good as that. But so look, I don't think it's going to have a difference. Yes, Eddie Howe probably would have liked Tyndall there at Brighton because he's still not going to be 100%. But in terms of it changing the complexities of the game, I don't think so.
And it's a horrible place for Newcastle to go, the Amex. So fingers crossed they can get the better of Brighton. Of course, we'll have the match preview later in the week with John Gibson. We will now look at the big call in midfield. Joe Willock out with a knee injury, and we wait to see the full scope of it. But it was Joe Willock that got the nod to replace him. His first start since February. And you asked Eddie Howe after the game why it was Joe Willock and not Lewis Miley. Here is what the boss had to say. Let me just quickly find the video. And this is what Eddie Howe had to say to Aaron's question.
Eddie, there was a big call in midfield. Can you just talk about your thinking about why it was Joe Willock or maybe Louis Miley to replace Joe Willock?
Yeah, always a tough decision, but I think Joe Linton has played on the left for us. Joe Willock is a natural player that wants to play on the left, although he's right-footed, very similar to Joe Linton. So it's to sort of keep the rhythm of the team rather than bring someone who maybe prefers to play on the right like Louis. So that was behind my thinking. Joe Willock's an outstanding player in his own right. He's done some really good things for us this season. I think he'll benefit from the game today. He's got a big part to play in our last 4 games.
It makes sense there what he's saying, Eddie Howe, based on the positional want of Joe Willock and how he can just kind of slot into where Joe Linton has been playing for the majority of this season. How did you think Joe Willock did?
Joe Willock really struggled on Saturday, and it's a shame. But I'm going to go back to something I've said in the last couple of episodes we've done in particular, and that is I do feel a little bit for Joe Willock, just as I probably feel for Anthony Gordon and a little bit Callum Wilson. Joe Willock has came in from the cold. He hasn't had much game time at all. I think he's had 77 minutes of game time across the last 4 games. He's obviously then missed another 2 through concussion. The last time he started was February 26th. So he hasn't played a lot of football. He looked like a player who was a bit rusty. We know Joe Willock is a player who thrives on being, confident and when he's got momentum behind him. Joe Willock was really trying on Saturday, and he was getting really annoyed that things weren't coming off for him. And I think he'll have been getting annoyed because he knows, there is 2 other midfielders now battling out for his spot. If Joe Linton is out for, the next couple of weeks, he has to take every opportunity. And unfortunately on Saturday, in a home game against 10 men, against a team that are relegated, that is the perfect opportunity to state your claim. And unfortunately for Willock, I just don't think he did.
Although it was against Ipswich, the third worst side in the Premier League, kind of not the game that suits Joe Willock's style, is it? He's a man who does better when he has the need and space to kind of run into. Newcastle obviously had a lot of the possession. They kind of had to be patient in their build-up. That's not where Joe Willock is best suited. He's best suited in a team that counters. With that in mind, obviously Newcastle United won, so it's not really a relevant question, but I'll ask it anyway. Someone like Lewis Miley coming in from the start would have maybe been a better fit, just simply because maybe the style of play on Saturday afternoon suits him, whereas you could argue against Brighton in the game to come, that is more Joe Willock's opportunity to impress, because it'll suit his style of play better.
Yeah, I'll be totally honest. In the sort of the media room before the game, when we knew Joe Linton hadn't arrived, he hadn't been spotted with the team, and we were talking about who it was going to be before the team was dropped, I said, look, well, it's going to be Lewis Miley, isn't it? Now, I understand Eddie Howe's answer to my question. I think Willock is the natural like-for-like replacement, but I just think in that pecking order at the minute, I think Lewis Miley is probably the fourth choice midfielder behind the three that have been playing. So maybe, naively, I just expected him to come in. I understand Willock, because it was a left-sided role, was chosen. But, Louis Miley starting in a game like that, potentially when Newcastle have got a lot of the ball, maybe, yes. But I think, look, I don't have any issues with Joe Willock starting. He is a good player, but I think he will, as Eddie Howe said, I think he'll come on for the game. I think he probably needed it. Whether he's done enough to stay in the team for Brighton, I'm not sure.
I think he'll start against Brighton, and Eddie Howe said that towards in that clip that he's got a big role to play in the last 4 games. So reading that, what you will, but to me that sounds like he will play the rest of the season, start the rest of the season if Joe Linton is out for the rest of the campaign.
Yeah, look, I don't have too much issue with that. Look, I would like to see more of Louis Miley in the Premier League. I don't think, I don't think it's been a particularly good season for Louis Miley on the back of such a breakout season. That's purely because he hasn't been getting the game time.
But again, Eddie Howe's come out and said Miley's got a big future here. He's part of the plans. A lot of people are very impressed with how Miley played on Saturday. Came on the 67th minute, so got a bit more time than the rest of the subs. And a lot of people watching live now saying, he impressed and he should be ahead of Willock in the pecking order.
Well, look, I think he is potentially. And look, if it was Bruno who dropped out the team, then by the same logic, would Louis Miley have maybe started because it was on the right, not the left? Look, we don't know, but I certainly think Miley is probably above Willock in the pecking order, in my personal opinion, because of what he's done this season and last season. We've had the conversation, haven't we, about Joe Willock, about is it time to cash in? He now potentially has 4 games to fight for his career at Newcastle and say, look, I've still got a part to play here. But look, it's interesting. Joe Linton, we don't know the severity of his knee injury at the minute. He's gone to see a specialist. He's going to have a scan. I think the fact he's gone to see a specialist and he's been carrying a knock on his knee for a while suggests that we might not see him again at the end of the season. There's only 4 games left. That is now a straight shootout for me between Louis Miley and Joe Willock as to who gets to start. I don't think we're really talking about Sean Longstaff in that same category anymore. And if it is Willock who gets the nod in the next couple of weeks, he's got a player behind him breathing down his neck who every time he's played this season has barely put a foot wrong despite being 18. So that adds a little bit more pressure.
Yeah, but hopefully a bit more motivation for Joe Willock to reach his true potential. Kevin says Willock is more effective with space to run into. He's never going to get that against Ipswich. He'll be good against Chelsea as they lack pace and won't sit back. Gary says Willock was targeted all game and the ref decided to turn a blind eye to most of it. I'm sure it would have been Big Joe. He'd have been given a yellow card by this ref. Absolutely shocking. We'll talk more about the referee's performance later in the show. And Andy says Miley probably did better when he replaced Joe Willock. Il Cover also adds, I honestly thought Willock would kick on this year, but he's gone backwards. The rest of the team, Aaron, remained unchanged, and they looked refreshed, a totally different side to the one that wilted and collapsed so badly at Villa Park a week earlier. Why? How?
Well, look, one, probably the fact that we're back at home and against a very poor opposition compared to Aston Villa, but also I think that week on the training pitch will have done them good. they had that full break from Villa to Ipswich, which they needed. Eddie Howe coming back in the middle of that week will have been huge and given pretty much everyone a lift, even though Howe sort of tried to play that down on Friday when we asked him about it. I think they just needed a reset after Villa. It was a very hectic week, wasn't it? Manchester United, Crystal Palace, and then a really grueling trip to Villa Park. The players were given a couple of days off after Aston Villa came back in the middle of the week and bounced back in style. Now, between now and the end of the season, 4 games left, and every single one of them is on a weekend. There's no midweek games, which means more time on the training ground, more time to recuperate, and hopefully more results and performances like we saw on Saturday.
Yeah, and Craig adds here 3 games in 6 days and no changes. Wasn't a great idea. No rotation anywhere. So that's why Newcastle have now managed to go out there and beat Ipswich, because they've had a few more days to rest and recuperate. The first big moment of the first half was the sending off of Ben Johnson, the Ipswich right winger. Received 2 yellow cards. Let's talk about the first one, Aaron. Done for diving. Bit harsh or thoroughly deserved?
Look, I think it was probably deserved. We spoke to Kieran McKenna, the Ipswich manager, after the game, and he was really, really unhappy with that decision. He said, the momentum was carrying Johnson through. Burns sticks a leg out. He's expecting the challenge, but there was no contact, and actually, if he'd stayed on his feet, he would have had a good chance of opening the scoring for Ipswich. So I don't think you can have too many complaints with the book, and I certainly thought, it was probably the right decision at the time. Just a couple of minutes later, he gets spun quite well by Alexander Isak, and he's off. So I don't think you can have too many complaints. And that was probably one of the few decisions on the day that the ref actually got right.
I think it's maybe a little bit harsh, but I can see why it was given. And actually, I'm going to use my favourite word of all time: refreshing to see the referee actually penalise someone he's deemed to have dived. Because how often do we see that in the Premier League these days? We don't. We know what they should do, but they never do, and it really frustrates us. So very happy to see that someone has actually been shown a yellow card for what the referee's deemed a dive. As you said there, 37th minute, he pulls back Alexander Isak. No question, it's a yellow card, and Ben Johnson receives his dismissal. As we said, seen a few people say that the game kind of changes on that dismissal, but it's fair to say that Newcastle, had good chances before the sending off. Alexander Isak had a header and a volley maybe should have done a little bit better on. Did the red card only accelerate the inevitable, do you think? Or you're kind of grimacing here. You think, again, they struggled up to that red card and they didn't really dominate?
They dominated the ball, but in terms of clear-cut chances before that red card, there was few and far between. Isak had a header off target, which was tricky, volleyed one over, which he probably should have done better with. But if I'm totally honest, a lot of it was, as I said at the very start of the show, balls just being lumped into the box and dealt with pretty easily. Newcastle had the lion's share of the possession across the game, but also in the first half before the red card. But certainly for me, that was the big turning point.
We've had Bruno getting a disallowed goal. Your thoughts on this? Because my opinion, I don't understand why it's been disallowed. He's pushed into the keeper, isn't
it? It was really soft. Watching it live, I thought it was a foul. Seeing a replay, I actually changed my mind and thought it was really contentious. I think it's just a pattern we've seen, not just this season, but forever, really, of goalkeepers being really, what's the word?
Overprotected.
Overprotected.
Palmer goes up to it. He's not confident, and it's the defender who knocks Bruno back into him.
And Bruno doesn't jump. Bruno doesn't back into him. Bruno just stands his ground
and is kind of forced back into him.
So I thought it was a contentious decision. Which there were many in the first half. There was a VAR check on Joe Willock getting dragged to the ground. The referee missed an elbow on Tonali.
It was a chaotic final, a few moments to the first half, wasn't it, before Newcastle? And after Newcastle got that penalty, I mean, we've got Tonali hitting the woodwork as well, which would have been a fantastic goal, really nicely worked. But it was in that kind of 5-10 minute period where it was just like lighting a firework in a very small room.
It felt like the end of a second half where one team was going for it rather than the end of the first half. But as you say, you had the sending off, then you had Bruno's disallowed goal. Bruno has one cleared off the line. Tonali hits the bar. Delap pulls Burn at the ground, which was more of a penalty than the one that was given. Then that penalty wasn't given until the referee had to go to the monitor. And then you had essentially both sets of fans chanting,
The referee's not fit to
exactly
referee the game.
And then booed off at the interval. But it was an absolutely chaotic end of the first half. And it was one of those where you just sort of sit there at half time and think, and just breathe and calm down. It was frenetic, but it was, Newcastle got the opening goal in the 49th minute, 4 minutes of added time. There was only 1 minute of added time added on, which was crazy considering how much happened and given that there was about 3 VAR checks in the first half. But yeah, I don't think Michael Salisbury won many fans on Saturday.
Well, Craig says here, some of the challenges on and off the ball were way over the top. The ref never had any control of the game. And Andy says, I don't think the ref could cope with the noise from the crowd. Onto that penalty comes just before half time. Jacob Murphy, as you mentioned, they're pulled down in the box by Cisco, who also was the man who, shall we say, lightly tapped Tonali in the face. There is contact there. Slightly harsh, though. I mean, we've got even a few Newcastle fans live in the comments saying, actually, Brian saying, I think Murphy dived too.
I don't think he dived. I think there was contact, but I think he milks it.
I think it's one of those where if you're the attacking player and you're running into the opposition box and you feel any sort of contact, and he does have a good grip of his arm.
Yeah.
I'm not saying it's like a little slight tap.
But I think the way Murphy falls was quite unnatural.
Yeah,
I think he throws himself to the ground. And actually, I don't know for anyone not watching the game whether there was replays of it, but like I say, the lap on Burn a couple of minutes earlier for me was more of a penalty than.
Well, actually, in the extended highlights, you can't actually see that.
Yeah.
Razor mentions it off camera because the camera's over on the right hand side. You can just see Dan Burn kind of getting up and getting back into an onside position.
But it was weird because Burn and Delap, seconds before that incident, both got booked for little handbags in the box because they were grabbing each other. So there's a suggestion that if Delap had pulled him to the ground and it was penalised, he could have been off as well. So it was, like I say, it was a mental end.
Just Dan Burn saying, stay, don't go. Your £30 million clause is about to be activated. On the Delap, before we get onto Isak's penalty, how do you think he did? A bit hard for him to really impress once Ipswich go down to 10 men.
Yeah, it was a really tricky game for him and Ciso after the sending off, because before that, actually, they were causing Newcastle real problems. 2 or 3 minutes in the game, Burn gives a really poor pass away in his own box. And Jack Clark should actually probably do better with it and probably open the scoring. As I mentioned earlier, there's a moment where Ipswich launched a counter-attack and Delap absolutely... It's one of those moments, where Dan Burn's running back and he looks like he's running through quicksand. Delap absolutely tore him a new one. So there was flashes of decency and moments where you thought, okay, Delap's looking good here. But, from the 38th or 39th minute onwards, you didn't really see him because Ipswich just had so little of the ball. They couldn't really do anything.
I mean, thoughts on that link that Newcastle United are ready to pay the money and bring them to Tyneside?
I think... If Newcastle do go out and do it, then that's absolutely fantastic because of the money involved. But I also think he will be one of the most, if not the most, sought after attacker in the Premier League this season, because for £30 million, you're getting a 22-year-old who scored 12 goals in a really poor Ipswich side this season. Right profile, looks really good. He's quick. He can play across the front line. So I'm all for it. 30 million is an absolute snip, but there's
going to be competition.
There's going to be a lot of teams interested.
I think it would be brilliant for Newcastle United simply because it just offers something entirely different to what Isak can offer, and you need that. You don't just want another striker on the books. You want someone who can offer something a little bit different. The game plan isn't working, so you're not just changing personnel. You're changing the style as well. So I think it would be a superb signing.
But you make a good point there, different to what Isak does. This is a big sticking point, isn't it? Is Liam Delap going to want to come and play as a backup to Alexander Isak? When? And look, this is the big debate, and it's been a debate that's raged on Twitter in the last couple of days between Manchester United fans. Manchester United fans are saying, look, we can offer Liam Delap first team football. And yes, look, we might be finished 15th in the Premier League this season, but he's going to be our main man above Rasmus Højlund. Newcastle can't offer that, can they? So it depends what the player wants. And that's just another reason why I think it's probably going to be a tricky deal to pull off for Newcastle.
I'm sure Champions League football might be enough to bring him to Tyneside, but one to watch certainly in the summer. Isak nets the penalty, a very, very cool penalty. I really loved the way he popped it in the back of the net. 16 goals now in his last 15 against promoted sides. He loves scoring against those sides at the bottom, or those sides who have come up. Very cool penalty.
Yeah, good penalty. Good penalty taken well at a crucial point in the game, right on the stroke of half time, and essentially killed it as a contest. But what I will say, and it might not be popular, I thought on the whole Alexander Isak really struggled. He missed 2 half-decent chances in the first half. He didn't really have a sniff apart from that. As I say, a lot of those balls getting pumped in the box weren't reaching him. They were evading him, or they were getting cleared before he could get to it. Eddie Howe was asked about Alexander Isak after the game, essentially to the effect of, what did you make of his performance? And I can't really remember what Howe said, but I think Howe agreed with it. But look, this is the thing. He scored 22 goals in the league this season, Alexander Isak. I think he's got 26 in all competitions. Yeah. And I think we've probably sat on this podcast quite a few times. Not a lot, but a couple of times I thought, you know what, he probably wasn't at his best, or he maybe struggled, and yet he's still scoring. So please don't think I'm being too critical of Alexander Isak, but I just wonder, does he need a rest? Does he maybe need the end of the season to come so that he can maybe just go and lie on a beach for a couple of weeks? I don't know, but he's still scoring goals, and he's still, probably my favourite Newcastle United player. So,
and I wonder if the answer to that question would be a lot simpler if you had someone like Delap's quality who you could bring in from the start, not someone like Wilson who's heading very much into the sunset and you just don't know why he's coming off the bench. Not someone like Osula who's very raw and still got a lot to learn. Someone who, Delap still isn't the finished product. I was speaking to an Ipswich Town fan on the last podcast we did, and he said he's very raw. He's not the finished article, but he's good at what he does. And I think he's a certain upgrade on Osula, and he's an upgrade on Wilson because of the fitness and the age and what have you. And I do wonder whether you would actually be this time of the season is really interesting, whether you'd be having a fresher Alexander Isak if Howe early in the season had a chance to rotate. Do you know what I mean? Yeah. But Isak's got that responsibility where he's kind of been the sole striker because of form and age of Osula and fitness of Callum Wilson. And maybe we are seeing a tired Isak. But hey, look, if he's scoring 1 goal and helping Newcastle to a 3-0 win and the rest of the game he's quiet, then I'm not complaining because he's got the goal, right?
Yeah, exactly. And like I said, I don't want to be too critical of him. I'm not being too critical of him, but aside from that penalty, there was very little that stood out for Alexander Isak. And I think it's like the conversation we were having last week or the week before on the pod. It's going to be really interesting to see which direction Newcastle go in this summer. 1, in terms of what they do with Callum Wilson. 2, in terms of what they do with Will Osula. I mean, he came on the right wing the other day rather than through the middle. And then it's going to be really interesting, 3, to see, well, do you go for someone like Delap, who's young and who can learn off him? Do you go for someone like Jonathan David, who can maybe rival him? It's going to be really, really interesting to see which sort of avenue they choose this summer.
Jack says, if I was Delap, I'd rather play second fiddle to a world-class striker, get starts in the easier Premier League games, 20 minutes at the end of every other game. I can't see Isak staying longer than 2 more seasons. So there's the viewpoint there. And Craig says, the right wing is most important. No cover there. Up front, Wilson, Gordon and Osula could play there at a push. No one for right wing. He wants to go for Mbeumo. So let us know in the comments where your priority lies. But yeah, certainly a very interesting summer to come. The message at half time you would feel would have been, let's push on, let's just do a little bit more, try and get a few more goals because of the goal difference. Obviously that could really count towards the final position at the end of the season. What do you think the message was?
Well, Eddie Howe came out after the game and essentially said, we've been in positions this season where it's been 10v11 and we've won. We've had the 10 men, and we've also seen, plenty of teams come to Newcastle over the years and have 10 men and actually win it. Liverpool, he obviously sticks out in the mind from a couple of seasons ago. So I don't think there was any complacency. I think you could tell by that from Eddie Howe, he still wanted the players to go for it. He made substitutions, but he made the right type of substitutions. He wasn't shoring up the game or the lead. He was, it was like for like. He was bringing on Anthony Gordon. He was bringing on Will Osula to try and sort of keep that attack and emphasis on the game. So it was just a really professional job and one where Newcastle sort of didn't take the foot off the pedal, which was good to see.
Yeah, I mean, even right up to the final whistle, they were going for more goals, which was great to see. Dan Burn adds to the scoreline with a close range header with a cross coming from the right-hand side. And you could see very early on in the game that the instruction was clear, and it was to get down Ipswich's left, targeting that position where their first choice left back was unavailable through suspension. 49% of United's attack came down their right, Ipswich's left, including 2 of the 3 assists on the day. And I just love when you can see that a team's done their homework and the plan is executed so perfectly. And that's what happened on Saturday. Get down their left, get the ball in the box. It was such a nice kind of plan that was executed, as I say, absolutely perfectly.
Yeah, it was evident really early on. You could see Kieran Trippier bombing up the pitch whenever he could, which he often does, but there was a real momentum, and we've just talked about there, Newcastle not taking the foot off the gas even until the very last minute. Trippier was up and down that line. I was actually looking at him, and he was my man of the match. He was our man of the match on the Chronicle. I think a lot of fans who were at the game probably think he was the man of the match as well. 2 assists. He looked like a player who was not 34, 35. He looked like he was in the mid-20s. And look, it's an easy game to do that because it's Ipswich with 10 men, but you know, there was a real willingness from him to get forward. The cross at the byline for Burn is the perfect example. The set piece for Osula is a great example as well of what he can offer. So it was a really, really good performance down that right. Murphy played well as well before Harvey Barnes got switched out there. Then Osula came on that wing. So they had a lot of joy down that right-hand side.
Well, between Murphy and Trippier, 27 crosses were attempted from the right-hand side. 7 came off, but that's more than most teams get in a match. So the numbers, you know, it's not like they were bad numbers, but you can see there from those stats, that's what the plan was. And as you mentioned there, Kieran Trippier, 34 years of age. He looks to have found a second wind. Superb on Saturday. The big question is about his future at Newcastle United. His deal is up at the end of next season. I've seen a ton of people on the back of the performance against Ipswich saying, get him a new deal. Your thoughts?
No, look, I'm in no hurry to give Kieran Trippier a new deal because he's 34 and he's not out of contract in the summer. If he was out of contract in the summer, I'd be absolutely racing to give him a new deal. But look, I think a lot can change in 15 months. And look, we know Kieran Trippier, unfortunately, isn't the future for Newcastle United because of his age. But look, it just reaffirms Eddie Howe's decision to keep him. Eddie Howe has fought for months and years even to make sure he doesn't leave the football club. He hasn't. And I'm just glad that he's sort of found his feet again towards the back end of the season. He's been brilliant since the turn of the year, I think.
Certainly has, and it makes the pre-season and the start of next season really, really interesting. Also, I mean, it hinges on when Lewis Hall is fit and returning to action. But, you know, it's not as if Livramento is just going to have a free rein at right back, is it?
No, not at the moment. He's certainly, you know, he's not just there to make up the numbers, Trippier, and he's not just filling in for Livramento. He's there on his own merit. So yeah, really interesting to see what they do in the summer with him. We know he's had an interest in his signature for a long time from Europe, from Saudi Arabia, from the Middle East. Whether that reappears in the summer, I'm not too sure. Does he maybe think it's time to go? But I would think actually, of the last 2 years when Trippier has been linked with away, this is probably one of the best spells he's having. So maybe it's sort of changed his mind on that as well.
Well, Eddie Howe was asked about Kieran Trippier's future after the win over Ipswich, and this is what the Newcastle United manager had to say.
Can I just ask about Kieran Trippier, 34, 35 in September, but there's not many better players in his position in the Premier League, are there?
No, I don't think there are. I think it's a real testament to his ability, his physical ability to do what he does at his age is not easy. He's playing in one of the hardest positions to execute. His cross for the second goal just sums up his quality, really. He's a difference maker for us. He brings obvious qualities on the ball, but his leadership skills and his experience helps us in so many different ways.
You want to keep him next season?
Yeah, I mean, it goes without saying. We want to keep our best players and add to the squad if possible. That's a big thing.
Please get the journalists a microphone. That was Telegraph's Luke Edwards asking the question. I hope we managed to at least get the gist of what he was asking anyhow. But really interesting what House had to say there. I mean, that's as clear as he can be. We want to keep Kieran Trippier.
Yeah, look, that's been consistent with his stance. You know, whether it was January 2024 when Bayern Munich wanted him, whether it was last summer when there was talk of him going to Turkey and Saudi Arabia, and even in January when the British window had closed and there was still, lingering speculation that he could potentially be moving abroad as well. So Eddie Howe loves him. Eddie Howe rates him. It's no surprise, not just because of what he offers on the pitch and in periods like this, but also, we don't need to go over how good he is off the pitch and off the ball. So, yeah, I'm all for him staying just like Eddie.
Those calls for a new deal, do you think we are...
I can't understand that. And if I'm honest, I haven't really seen clamour to give him a new deal. Is that because people think he's out of contract this summer? Like, why is
I just saw a few people on social media after the game on Saturday saying, get him tied down to an extra year, with a kind of a clause that he can become a coach and what have you. But, as we say, he's got a year left. It's not like Newcastle United are going to lose him on a free this summer. I think the harder part of the challenge, or maybe the easier part, is to persuade him that actually you should stay on Tyneside. It doesn't matter if, you know, an MLS team come knocking or a team from Europe come knocking.
Big Saudi
You know, persuade him that here is where you need to be and finish your career at Newcastle United. But I do question whether on Trippier, with those suggestions, and on this game as a whole against Ipswich, are we celebrating this slightly too much? I mean, we've got to be careful because of who it was actually against, i.e. Ipswich, with all due respect to them, one of the worst sides the Premier League's ever seen. Yes, Trippier played immense. Yes, Newcastle United were dominant and played really, really well. But we also have to admit Ipswich were pretty dire and pretty awful. And you would expect Newcastle United to win this game. You would expect Kieran Trippier to have a good game. He's not going to get that space and time against Brighton or an Arsenal. And Newcastle aren't going to be allowed to dominate so easily against better sides. I think we celebrate the win. We compliment the players for how they played. We compliment Newcastle for bouncing back so well after the defeat to Villa. We compliment them for doing what we expected them to do, beat Ipswich. But that's also kind of part of the point. It was against Ipswich.
Yeah, look, I don't think anybody's celebrating more than they should. I think, as all the points you've made, they're absolutely valid. I think it was a case of 99% of the fans that rocked up at St James's Park on Saturday probably rocked up thinking this is going to be one of the easiest 3 points we got. And look, it turns out it was job done, it was comfortable. But as you say there, it was really, really important to bounce back after what happened at Villa. And I think we all said, didn't we, especially us on this show last week, we're not really too worried about the defeat against Villa because we know what's coming up next. On paper, 3 points. If they'd lost against Ipswich, especially 10 men of Ipswich, then we'd be sat here maybe with a bit of panic stations. Instead, we're sat here, Newcastle back in third, they're back in the driving seat for Champions League football. And yeah, good day at the office.
Third goal came from William Osula. Brilliant cross, as we mentioned there, from Kieran Trippier. I mean, just describe your emotion as the ball rocketed in the back of the net from what was a superb header.
Yeah, I think I said on the episode I did on Saturday night, I think I said it was the biggest roar of the day by none when Will Osula scored. You know, really, really, you could tell there was relief from him and joy from him, but also you could tell that the fans, not only in the Gallagher but all on the stadium, really, really were glad that it was him that has finally broken and stuck in the Premier League. He's had to be so patient. We know what he's like off the pitch. He looks a great character in the dressing room. You could tell by the reaction of the players around him that they all were over the moon that he scored. And as you say, great header. He came off the bench, and not only a goal, he came on and he was really positive with the ball. He was, you know, Newcastle were 2 or 3-0 at this point, but he was getting the ball and he was thinking, right, I'm going to run at these defenders. Probably sensing that Newcastle were on a high, Ipswich were on the back foot. It was the perfect time of game to bring him on. He brought him on early enough to actually have an impact on it. And yeah, brilliantly taken goal. Hopefully, you know, this is sort of a turning point for him. Yeah,
well, interesting because earlier in the show you mentioned Joe Willock coming in from the cold. You've referenced Anthony Gordon, who obviously came off the bench as well late in the game, about them kind of coming in from the cold and not really taking the opportunity, and that's maybe a reason why. But Osula's had less minutes than those two, and yet, especially in this game, and I think in other appearances he's had, he hasn't had many admittedly, he looks lively enough to deliver some encouragement. But I guess they're trying to prove different things, aren't they, as well?
Yeah, massively. And look, it's different positions. And also, look, I think Will Osula is probably just chomping at the bit because he's so young and raw. And, you know, he's had so little game time this season. I mean, 96 minutes of Premier League football he's played across his first season, which obviously isn't a lot.
I guess being at different stages of their career as well, that's why it's perhaps a little bit different, because maybe Joe Willock in his head knows if he doesn't start stepping up and taking these chances and these opportunities, then maybe the exit door is there. Whereas Osula, you know, he's not going anywhere, even if he's
playing without fear, isn't he? Because one, he's not. Look, Will Osula isn't close to getting first team football. You know, I think if let's say Jacob Murphy picks up an injury, I don't think Will Osula comes in like Joe Willock has. I think it's Barnes and Gordon. There's pressure on Willock. I understand that. He really does have players breathing down his neck. Osula can sort of come in and just play without fear, can't he? And sort of play with a bit of flair. He's a very, you know, flair type of player.
Has he laid down the marker for the rest of the season? Because again, a lot of people on social media questioning in previous games, why is it Callum Wilson coming on instead of Will Osula? Looking at how he came on to begin with, he came on the right wing, as you've mentioned. So that kind of suggests to me that actually nothing's really going to change. It's still going to be Callum Wilson, Alexander Isak, and Osula will get on probably on the flank if needed. But I can't see it changing. But I can understand the argument to why it should and why Osula should be ahead of Wilson for the next 4 games.
Yeah, I think the one thing I always used to say about Callum Wilson is that, and the brilliant thing about Callum Wilson for all these years has been, no matter how many injuries he had, he always came back and hit the ground running, and he always looked like there was still more to give. And I think for the first time ever, we're seeing Callum Wilson return from injury and not offer that. I think he looks noticeably slower. He's not getting in the right positions. He hasn't obviously really done anything of note since coming back into the team. So I understand the clamour for Will Osula to go above him in the pecking order, so to speak. But I think Saturday, as you mentioned, shows that he's probably not there yet. And Eddie Howe doesn't really have any grand desire to bring Alexander Isak off and put Will Osula through the middle above Callum Wilson. 4 games left for the season. Will that change now? Potentially. But I think it's more about what happens next season. I think we're all talking about what happens to Will Osula. I sort of hope he stays and gets more game time rather than going out on loan. I can see the argument for sending him out on loan, but I think Eddie Howe might want to keep him on Tyneside and get a proper look at him.
And let us know in the comments what you think the future holds for Will Osula in the short term. We've got Eddie Howe here talking about Osula after the game.
Yeah, I think it's a difficult one to judge, but we think he's improved. But obviously, the acid test will be when he performs on the pitch and in the team. And today, I thought he was excellent. He came on a right wing, which is a totally different position. I know it's obvious, but it's a totally different position and different skill set to playing as a 9. But I thought he looked a real threat. He looked quick and athletic, and the goal I thought was an outstanding finish. He's 6'3", verging on 6'4", so he needs to be a physical presence. He needs to use his aerial skills. Delighted that he got his first Premier League goal.
What did you make of that?
Yeah, I was just about to read this quote out, so I'm glad I didn't because you had the video ready to go. Yeah, look, I think he's absolutely spot on. I think Eddie Howe got it pretty right there, what he said about Will Osula. I think still, though, I think there's more to come from Will Osula, and I don't think we've seen anywhere near the finished article yet. And I think, it's such a lazy comparison to make, but is he going to be the Lewis Hall of next season? Hopefully.
Keeping everything crossed that he is.
Yeah.
Interesting, though, that he did come on the right wing. We're looking at the bigger picture. Does that again reaffirm what has to happen in the summer transfer market?
Yeah, look, I think, again, you look at the positions on the pitch, you look at the strength and depth, and at the minute, Jacob Murphy is the only out-and-out right winger in that squad. Harvey Barnes and Gordon are obviously naturally left-sided players. Will Osula famously and historically has been a central striker and a number 9. So, yeah, look, people will be bored listening to me.
Famously.
Yeah, well, historically, yeah. But yeah, people will be bored of me on this podcast if you listen to a while talking about the right wing position, because still to this day it's the priority.
You, me, every other Newcastle United podcast, we know what needs to happen.
Yeah.
Gordon and Miley came off the bench as well, as we've said there. Interestingly, that Howe admitted Gordon isn't 100% fit, I thought was quite noticeable. He said that in the press conference.
Yes, still carrying a knock with his knee, I want to say.
Yeah.
Look, I think even if he was fully fit, I don't think he's getting back in this team at the minute over Harvey Barnes, who probably didn't have his best game on Saturday, but I think will keep his place for Brighton. But look, this is what we want. 2 really good players battling it out. Harvey Barnes has done really well since coming into the team, laid down a marker. And Lewis Miley again came off the bench and was very, very good. Again, maybe reaffirm why he should have started.
Botman back as well.
Botman back, another good positive. He only got 4 or 5 minutes. If I'm totally honest, I can't remember him doing anything because Ipswich had the ball nowhere near Newcastle's back line. But really positive to see him back. We know since Saturday that Matt Targett is now probably going to be out until the end of the season. Look, people will say, well, why does that matter? He's never going to play. But it just highlights how thin on the ground they are at the back. It's Trippier, Livramento, Byrne, Kraft, Share, and Botman. That is the 6 of them for 4 spots. And then you start going at the under-21s. So Botman back will be huge. I don't know how much we'll see of him between now and the end of the season, but good to see him back ahead of schedule from that knee operation.
Indeed. I was just about to say there before you mentioned the Target news, that totally slipped my mind, that Newcastle are starting to get the depth back. And I still think the point actually stands in terms of the quality. because you've got Botman back, and yes, okay, we don't know how fit he really is. He's certainly not match fit, but you've got Gordon there as well. Then you look at Osula having a bit more confidence about him. Miley, we're talking about, could he be the man to start against Brighton and then Chelsea and so on? Yes, you've missed Joe Linton, so you've lost one player, but I think the bench is starting to look a little bit stronger. Obviously, it's not as strong as Man City, Villa, Chelsea, the rest of them, but with Botman coming back, with Miley impressing, I'm feeling in a much better place looking at the options on the bench.
Possibly. I feel like I might go against you here. I feel like looking at that bench on Saturday, you had two goalkeepers again, one of which was John Ruddy. So take those two out, then you're left with 7. Wilson's not offering anything. That's down to 6. Emil Kraft's not really coming on. That's down to 5. Sean Longstaff's not getting a look in. That's 4. Oh. Are you down to maybe a squad really of 14 or 15 who are actually going to have any sort of say?
I'm just too positive after Saturdays. I think just having Botman back as an option is really important.
Back is huge,
because as you mentioned there, where Newcastle are weakest in their options is across the back line. Share or Burn pick up an injury. You were looking at Kraft. Okay, now you're probably looking at a 67% fit or match fit as Van Botman, but still an option you'll take. So yeah, I am feeling a little bit maybe more optimistic than you are regarding the depth. Obviously, there's a lot of the work to do in the summer, and you'd love to be talking about depth with Joe Linton fit, wouldn't you? That's probably the big downside to that. We'll see what happens with him. We've mentioned there as well, love it, right up until the final whistle that we're trying to add goals to the scoreline. Gordon goes close, there's a few other opportunities. Yes, against terrible side. I mean, we're one man short, but they just didn't take the foot off the gas. And we saw against Crystal Palace, obviously the scoreline was a few more to Newcastle, but they did sit back the second half entirely. And maybe that had a knock-on effect to the Aston Villa game, where maybe, because it was such a breeze and they didn't push themselves, they kind of went in the Aston Villa game a little bit kind of, I don't know what the right word is, but, not as up for it maybe. Whereas here, right until the final whistle, they were trying to score more goals. And I think that will set them well going into the game against Brighton.
Yeah, the standard was set, the standards were kept, and they gave Ipswich absolutely zero hope of getting back into the game. Essentially from the time they're sending off until the very, very final whistle. Really good scenes at the end with the final whistle. Ipswich obviously relegated on Saturday because they didn't win or get a win. We knew for some time they were going to go down, but there was a real respect. That lap of honour from Newcastle was sort of coincided with Ipswich clapping the fans off. Really good to see that inside the ground. But as we said, it was a case of literally Newcastle turning up, job done, ticked off the list. And Brighton... Worried more so because Newcastle just really, really struggle playing at the Amex. Historically, it's been a terrible ground from the go. And Brighton are just one of those teams who I just hate playing home or away.
So pacey, aren't they?
Yeah.
And that's why I'm not, climbing up to the roof and hanging a flag off the side with Kieran Trippier's facing, because I think he might have a little bit of a tough time against Brighton, as might the whole of the defence. It's going to be a lot closer, I think, to that Villa game than it is what we saw on Saturday. But Newcastle United are in good spirits, and we've been to grounds this season where they've had horrible records, Emirates, Old Trafford, and we've changed that. Newcastle have changed that, so they can do it again against Brighton. Newcastle up to third, 62 points, one ahead of City. Played the same number of games as City, who are fourth, and Chelsea in fifth. Forest have played one less. They played Brentford, I think, on Thursday at home. So interesting game there. And Brentford have a chance of European football as well. So they will be wanting to win that game. Do we discount Villa from the race, sitting on 57 points?
No, I don't think so.
No,
I think that's still with a shout. I mean, look, they're 5 behind Newcastle. No, look, anything can happen. Newcastle could quite easily go to Brighton and Arsenal and drop points. Villa, before their loss to Manchester City, were in great form in the league. I know they've had a bit of a terrible week on the face of it, but no, I'm not writing them out yet. But looking at that too, I mean, look, Forest with that game in hand is huge. Forest going back to third would be massive for them.
I still think they can catch Arsenal.
Do you reckon?
I think if you beat Brighton, then you got Chelsea. And then you go to Arsenal, don't you? Second last game of the season. Yeah. Arsenal distracted. I think there's a chance here. Arsenal have shown in the Premier League they're not all that. They're a very good side, but I think they're
only won 2 of the last 5 in the league. But you've got to think they did then go and beat Madrid.
Yeah, but that's where the focus is on the Champions League. So Newcastle just got to do what they do, keep winning, and I think second isn't out of the out of the equation
Let's
at
see
all.
when Arsenal play PSG, because they play them tomorrow in the first leg, and then hopefully they play them and then the second leg's before Liverpool. Yeah, so doesn't really affect Newcastle.
But they get through that game.
Yeah, then they've got one
Champions League,
eye
innit?
on them.
I did ask people on social media to rate out of 10 how they're feeling about the following question, and it is: will Newcastle United qualify for the Champions League? And I had plenty of responses, so thank you very much to everyone who's got in touch. Before I read some of the answers out, you want to give me your response? So out of 10, how are you feeling? How confident are you about Newcastle qualifying for the Champions League?
I'll go with a very, very respectable 8.
Oof, that's higher than I thought you would go.
No, I'm pretty confident they're going to get it. I think it would be a 9 if their fixtures were a little bit easier, and it would be a 10 if also the race wasn't so tight. I think they'll do it. They're back in the driving seat. I think they'll win both their home games. The only slight doubt for me is the 2 trips away.
We've got 67 responses, so I'm not going to read them all out.
Okay.
But thank you for taking part. We've got Footy Beer saying 7, which is how many points will guarantee it. John Sinclair saying, I'm saying 8 out of 10. 2 more wins should seal the deal for us. We've got Black and White Day saying 10. They are confident. We've got Leah saying 6. We've got 9th of June. Very good there. 4 out of 10. I do not like our next fixtures. Harry says 9. We'd have to be awful for the next 4 games, and Villa and Chelsea would have to be phenomenal. Won't happen. Neither of them are winning all 4 of their games. We got NUFC Fahim saying 7 out of 10. We've got Chris saying 6. The Chelsea game at home, I think, could be a 1-game shootout. Big Mickey saying 4 out of 10. Brighton and Arsenal are huge assets to get anything from. Chelsea are doing really well, and I think Forest will hold on. So they're not confident at all. Mark saying 6 out of 10. Our fixtures are nowhere near as easy compared to the rest of them. Probably Chelsea have a similar, but expect the other teams to pick up a fair few points. And Toon Loon saying 10 if we beat Brighton. And Drew has avoided the question altogether and says it all depends on how they do in the next 2 games. Well, yeah, thank you for that. Bob saying 7 out of 10, nervous, but Brighton and Arsenal away. 2 odd games. Hopefully Arsenal will still be in the Champions League because they could become distracted. And Geordie Abroad saying 8, but we struggle away at Brighton. Huge game, 2 huge games at home, but we should do it. And James says 8. Brighton is away is tricky. Chelsea have no idea what side will come to St James. Arsenal away is always difficult, but they'll hopefully have an eye on the final. And Everton, a normal home win, but they'll want to finish the season strong. I'm hoping it's all wrapped up by then. And just to finish off, Liam, with a sad face, says 3 out of 10 and that he's sorry. But to be fair, the rest of them are kind of 9. Got Kevin saying 9 here, James saying 8 out of 10.
Where are you on the list?
I've always been confident, and this season my confidence has been well placed. Maybe the Villa game aside, I think they're going to do it. And I still maintain they're going to catch Arsenal.
I want a number, please.
9.
Okay.
I say they're going to catch Arsenal. I must be going 10. And no, screw it. They're qualifying for the Champions League. I think they're qualifying for the Champions League. And I don't care whether it's 2nd, 3rd, 4th, or 5th, but I do think they're going to catch Arsenal.
They could honestly finish 5th on goals scored, and I would not care as long as they're in the top 5. So.
I think that Chelsea game is massive. Of course, I would say an absolutely.
Well, it is, but I am so confident they're going to beat Chelsea and they're going to beat Everton at home. The only thing that's slightly worrying me is the 2 away games.
Well, there we go. Let me know in the comments your thoughts. Out of 10, how confident are you that Newcastle are going to qualify for the Champions League? We've had a couple of questions sent in via email, which is fantastic. Ian says, I'm just wondering when the grand opening of the Osula fan club is. Thank you, Ian in Perth, for that. I'll wait until he gets a few more goals, maybe double figures before opening that fan club, but certainly been impressed from what I've seen. We've got Isak saying, afternoon, lads. Cracking season. Any of you guys concerned about our midfield 3? Not the first choice 3, but the drop off when any one of them is missing. For me, it's way too big of a gap. With Europe next season, I really think we need another arrival or a much better level of backup. Thoughts?
We were talking about this off earlier today about the midfield 6, so to speak, and one player that we haven't really spoke about in this episode because he hasn't been playing is Sean Longstaff. And I think if Sean Longstaff does go this season, I think you go out and you get a really good replacement for him who could maybe jump up.
A replacement as in like but better?
No, just like as in to somebody to make sure it's still a 6. I don't think you really promote anyone from that under 21 side at the minute. Don't think anyone's really ripping up trees in that position behind the scenes. So then I think, as you say, with Europe next season and them wanting to add depth, I think they go out and they get another really decent centre midfielder.
So is it only an arrival in centre mid if one of them goes?
Yeah, I think so. Well, look, I mean, yeah, I think so. I think because we talk a lot on this pod, don't we, about where the priorities lie. I don't think it's a priority. I think that email might be doing them a little bit of a disservice. Louis Miley's been fantastic when he comes in. Willock on his day is a brilliant midfielder. Sean Longstaff obviously hasn't got the run in. We don't know what's going to happen with him. It looks like he might be on the way out. But I don't look at that midfield and think, oh, it needs a dramatic uplift at all, even behind, sort of behind the favoured 3.
So you're not concerned about the perceived lack of level when a player like Joe Linton or Tonali or Bruno goes off?
No, because look, I think Joe Willock, if he has a run of games, can get back to where he was. Louis Miley, I don't have anything bad to say about him. I think he's came in and done really well. I think it's a real shame he hasn't been given more opportunity. But I think the reason he hasn't been given more opportunity is because of how good Tonali, Bruno, and Jolton have looked together. I think he's just been a victim of circumstance. I hope he stays beyond the summer and long into the future. But I would like to see him getting more game time.
Okay, now Stephen has sent in quite a few questions. How many are there in total? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 questions. So
seven,
six. I think it's 6. So I will pick a couple of them and we'll save the rest maybe for an episode with John Gibson later in the week. But thank you, Stephen, for sending them in. And you guys can send in your questions as well to the EIBW podcast at reachplc.com. So we'll go with Stephen's first question here, Aaron. What sort of budget will Newcastle United have with or without Champions League football this summer?
Look, it's hard to say, exactly what type of figure we'll have. We're not privy to all the sort of current standing with the PSR. We do know, as we've said in the pod before, that the purse strings do look like they're going to be loosened somewhat. They've avoided PSR sanctions for the last few years. They've obviously now got those sales behind them, and Champions League will be huge for what the money they know is going to come in. They're constantly opening revenue streams. As I've said before on this podcast, in terms of how much they'll spend, I wouldn't be surprised if it's like the summer of 23 when we saw Tonali and Livramento and Lewis Hall come in, which was around 100 mil all out. Harvey Barnes as well. So yeah, give and take 100. Look, it's hard if they go out and sell a big player which people maybe don't want to lose. I think that opens up a whole new realm of possibilities, and I think they can really go out and have a decent summer. And I don't think it's ever as clear as saying, they've got this amount to spend. I think it's pretty fluid,
isn't it? Oh, look at that. That was a bit scary.
That was quite fluid there, wasn't it? But look, as I've said before, I'll be really, really surprised if they don't have a good go this summer at spending.
Does it feel a bit like a turning point, though, for Newcastle United? I think back to that season, they qualified for you under Pardew, under Mike Ashley, and they went out and signed only Vernon and Anita. Are we at that kind of level where you go, it can't just be one player? We are at this kind of time of the project where we need to see true investment, 3 or 4 quality players brought in because of what can be achieved.
Yeah, look, I think that the majority ownership won't want to have a season of last season where they qualified for the Champions League and then it sort of derailed the following season. Obviously, injuries didn't help, but fighting on 4 fronts did take it out of that quite inexperienced group. And I think when they get the Champions League again this time around, I think they'll maybe have learnt lessons from the summer. Obviously, it's hard because in an ideal world, this ownership want to spend. We know that they're obviously hamstrung by the league rules, which aren't going to change. And sorry, they're changing slightly, but they haven't gone away.
I think what we will see, though, I think they've been very, very clever. I think that they've done what they can do in terms of setting the right foundation to have a successful transfer window this summer, in the face of some criticism from fans, more frustration from fans. I think totally understandable. I think they've seen those frustrations and accepted, but they're frustrated themselves, as you say, because they'd love to spend and can't. But I think they've done what they have to make sure this summer you do see the purse strings loosened slightly, and you will see, I think, at least 3 quality players coming in.
Yeah, well, I mean, you've only got to go back to January, haven't we, when they lost Miguel Almiron and they lost Lloyd Kelly, and they didn't replace either. And look, we know they couldn't replace them in January. If they could have, they would have. But I think, as you say, that's probably laid the foundations for a really exciting summer.
And I mentioned a player on last week's episode, the gang striker Tulo Aoukader, who has hit 20-odd goals this season in the Belgian Pro League. He's done an interview with Sports Boom, where he was asked about potential interest from Newcastle United. And he said, "For the media noise, I just try to stay focused and keep a clear head. The future is unwritten, but like many players, it's a dream of mine to one day play in the Premier League." So there we go. He's been asked about that interest from Newcastle, a reported interest. 22 goals to his name this season. A reported price tag of 17 million euros, which would be what, 16.5 million, something like that. So a gamble, a risk, yes, but one I could see Newcastle United potentially taking, which would free up room to spend elsewhere, say on a more established right winger, but one to watch closely potentially in the summer. On strikers, Stephen says Dominic Calvert-Lewin, is he a target if someone like Liam Delap doesn't come off?
Yeah, Newcastle have been really, really keen on Delap in recent windows. It hasn't came off. We know that he's out of contract in the summer. So look, I wouldn't be overall surprised if Newcastle sort of redeem that interest. I know Manchester United have maybe been looking around him as well. But yeah, Eddie Howe really likes him. I don't think it would go down too well.
No, I don't at all.
Safe to say.
I think the medical would have to be quite thorough,
Substantial, yeah.
wouldn't it? Because he's out injured again, isn't he? For Everton, probably unlikely to maybe appear at Goodison Park for the final time, which I'm not sure Everton fans will be too disappointed that. I don't think he's covered himself in glory over the last couple of seasons and now not signing a new deal. Yeah, look, a talented player, but it's just the injuries. If you're getting rid of Callum Wilson, you don't want to be bringing in someone who's just as likely to miss games through injury. So not for me. I know you've got to make the budget work in which way possible, but can't see that going down well at all. Final question then before we sign off. You've got the trivia as well, haven't you?
Yeah, sorry, I was just laughing there in the comments. Kevin Ball has put no with about 100 O's, no to DCL. I'll be very disappointed if we spent even a minute entertaining that idea.
I agree. And Roger says 17 goals in 3 seasons. Yeah, it's
Gary said he's not coming. Wayne says we all agree.
Nobody wants Dominic Calvert-Lewin. Paul Mitchell, if you're watching, I mean, you know what you're doing, but there you go. There's the comments. You can see how it might go down. And someone has said David is a better option. I mean, yes, if they can find the money to sign Jonathan David over Dominic Calvert-Lewin, I mean, no one's turning that down. But again, I think that might be pushing.
Sorry, I'm just laughing at this. The instant response in the comments.
Well, sums it up there, doesn't it? And we'll finish on Stephen's last question there. Jamal Lascelles, is he in the contract for next season? And regardless of whether he is or isn't, do you expect Newcastle to sell him this summer? He is. He signed a contract under the radar, didn't he?
Yeah.
An extension. Yeah,
so he is still in the contract into next summer. The club haven't officially confirmed it or announced it. Or
till next summer.
Yeah, sorry.
2026.
Sorry. Yes. I don't know what I said. Is that not what I said?
Yeah, next year.
Yeah, he's Jamal Lascelles has been back in sort of light training recently. We haven't seen him since March 24. And when you think he did a similar injury to Sven Botman, who's already been back and then went injured and then had an operation and came back again, it goes to show you how tricky that recovery has been for him. But look, it needs no going over. Eddie Howe loves him. He loves what he offers on the training ground. We saw that when Eddie Howe was off in the last 2 weeks, that leadership group really had to step up. Having players like Lascelles will be there. This is the point where people will be screaming, yeah, but you can't carry players like that in the squad if you want to be.
You can't also sell everybody.
But exactly, you can't get rid of them willy-nilly. I'm in the world of PSR. I don't really want to see anyone go on a free, because if you can get a couple of million here or there, that's great. In terms of what happens this summer, Jamal Lascelles had loads of interest in him in the last couple of windows from teams in Turkey. Wouldn't be surprised if that reared its head again for maybe one last payday.
I think he'll stay.
But yeah, if I was a better man, I think he'd stay.
All about depth, isn't it? And if he can find the form he found before he got injured, then we'll be absolutely laughing. Come on, then, let's get this trivia out of the way. I can't imagine there being too many players here at all.
Well, that's your first mistake, because there's 17 who have played.
17.
Yeah, I'll admit some of them I've never
in the Premier League.
Yeah, 17. Some of them I'll admit I've never heard of.
17. Okay, well, Kieran Dyer has one.
Yeah, well, right. So there you go. There's Kieran Dyer one.
17. Well, they haven't been in the Premier League for donkeys.
Yeah.
I'm already. I can't even think. There's no one in the current side, is there? There's there's no on the current side. So we're
No.
thinking back. It's
Right.
going to be someone like Charvet or someone, isn't it? Or
No.
Domi.
No.
Go on.
Do you want me to start giving you
Yeah.
clues? Right. So you've got Kieran Dyer, and then
17.
yeah, one who was flying this season. He played 8 games for Ipswich in 2014. He's also played for Leeds, Burnley.
Chris Wood.
Yeah, Chris Wood.
Chris Wood played for
Yeah,
Ipswich.
apparently 8 games, 270 minutes, scored 0 goals. A winger played for them in 2010. Again, I did not remember this at all. He also played for Spurs and Newcastle and Palace and Luton.
Townsend.
Yeah. Again, when the hell did this happen? Newcastle United legend, well, hero, played from 2003 to 2015 at Newcastle, and he played 3 games for Ipswich in 2016. He's a centre-back who's currently managing abroad.
Centre-back managing. Nah, go on.
Stephen Taylor.
Should I pay for Ipswich?
Nope.
No.
Right back, won the Premier League.
Danny Simpson.
Yeah, he played 8 games for them. A lot of these have only played a handful of games for Ipswich. Signed by Newcastle in the Championship under Rafa, played 18 games for them, was a bit of a sort of cult hero. He also had
Darren Murphy.
Yeah, had 7 years at Ipswich, scored 67 goals for them.
Darren Ambrose.
Darren Ambrose, there you go. One of the best celebrations in football, but unfortunately he played 6 times for Newcastle and we never saw it. He played for Ipswich 4 years, 2003 to 2007, 83 games played, 30 goals. I believe he was he Finnish? Great belly flop celebration. He was Finnish, wasn't he?
Yeah, I've interviewed him. Lovely bloke.
Yeah, great man. Wow, 6 games for Ipswich in 98, 1 goal. He also played for Newcastle in their first Championship season. Striker, also played for West Ham.
Marlon Howard.
Yep, that's the one.
He's always won these lists.
He is. Him and Chris Wood are always on the list. Winger for Newcastle, fell out with Eddie Howe twice at 2 different clubs.
Ryan Fraser?
Yeah.
Ipswich?
22 games in 2015, apparently.
No, he didn't.
Well, according to this list, he did.
Ryan Fraser played for Ipswich.
Yeah.
I'm going to have to Google this. This is one that I cannot believe. Go on, continue. He did as well.
He did, on loan. Midfielder who played for Newcastle and Sunderland, played 50 games for Ipswich in 2010.
Jack Colback.
Striker who also played for Sunderland and Newcastle. Ended his career in India, I want to say.
Michael Chopra.
Defender who sort of made his name at Ipswich before being signed by Bobby.
Titus Bramble.
Calamitous. Yeah. God, there's a lot of these to get through. Midfielder who famously had a bust up with another player of Ipswich, Lee Bowyer. And he played for Newcastle at the same time as Marlon Harewood. Was very, very good. I really liked him. He played... I don't even know what else to say about him. Played for Coventry, I want to say. Ipswich.
Go on, then name him.
Leon Best.
There you go.
And there was a couple of us, but
that's a list. That might be the longest list we've had.
That was a lot, and that was tough.
Well, thank you very much, guys, for tuning in. I hope you guys have enjoyed the show. Me and Aaron will be back next week, hopefully celebrating 3 points against Brighton. Do hit thumbs up, do hit subscribe, do go over to the website as well to keep up to date with all the latest Newcastle United news. And for myself and Aaron, we'll see you guys very soon.